Oh, hey everyone, it's Phoenix. What am I up to? Just doing some reading. Man, if only there was a place where I can find others to share this passion with. Wait a minute, that's it. It could have been worse. Somehow more depressing than Ultimatum. Well crap, what am I supposed to do now? Everybody knows that time of the year. Comic-Con. Everybody with the geeky/nerdy interest knows about it. Hell, if you're watching, you've probably been to one, or really wanted to. It's an annual tradition that's pretty much expected every year. But have you ever wondered how we ended up doing these same motions every year? I know I have. Maybe a little too much. From what I could gather, this could all be traced back to 1962. I'm getting all this info from two articles. One from Geek Frontiers titled 1964 New York Comic Con by Anthony Letizia, and another article from Comic Book Resources titled Survivors of the First Comic Con Gather at NYCC by Bridget Alverson. I highly recommend checking the original articles out for yourself. So, this all started when a teenage fanboy, I'm sure all of us can relate, Bernie Bubness, shared his passion to have a comic book convention and a self-produced fanzine, Comic Heroes Revisited. Eventually, it happened. 2 years later, on July 27, 1964, the first Comic Con was held at the Worksman Circle in Manhattan. What's crazy is that the convention was so close to taking place in New Jersey, only for Bernie to realize that most people who worked on the comics that everyone liked lived and worked in New York City. Can you imagine if that hadn't happened? You could have gotten New Jersey Comic Con instead. Yeah, that sounds trippy saying out loud. By the combined efforts of the two articles I have, I found out that among the people in charge of this whole con were 5 dealers. Phil Sealing, who would go on to reshape the comics industry along with his partner, Len Berman. The way he went to reshape the comics industry was by being responsible for the development of the direct market, which led to there being stores specializing in selling and buying comic books. Len Wein was also there, who will be one of the creators of Swamp Thing and the Wolverine, who was part of the organizing committee, even though at one point he was thrown off the project. Regardless, everybody credits him with coining the Comic-Con term. Another member was a college student. Art Tripp appeared unannounced at Bernie's house and offered his aid. Additional members of the organizing committee were Ethan Roberts, as well as Rick Bierman and Howard Rogofsky. It was also Tripp who paid for the manufacturing of 100 buttons that said 1964 Comic-Con that was given out at the convention. And I'm pretty sure the 5th member was Bernie himself. Now, what actually happened there? Pretty cool stuff actually. The whole appeal of this convention, well, to put it simply, was just meeting up with other people like you who were passionate about the same stuff. It may not seem like anything crazy, but something like that can go a long way, even though the number of people who attended was a minuscule amount by today's standard. The Geek Frontiers article claims that there were about 56 people in total attendance, but CBR claims it was 43, so I feel like the CBR one is the safest bet since the CBR article actually involves the people who were there sharing their experiences. But let's not forget about certain guests, the people who worked in this industry. Marvel intern Dave Twett, Steve Ditko, best known for designing Spider-Man's original costume, Tom Gill, who illustrated on The Lone Ranger, Flo Steinberg, Stan Lee's secretary at the time and his first secretary at Marvel, who went to see what the con was like for herself. Something to note I feel that should be mentioned about her is that she was responsible for publishing Big Apple Comics, which, according to Marvel.com, is one of the cornerstones in the history of independent comics. The CBR article also claims she was one of 3 women in attendance. And the last but not least guest I wanted to mention was George R.R. Martin, specifically when he was 15. Yeah, so the dude who went on to write Game of Thrones attended the very first Comic-Con. He, according to the CBR article, was the first one to buy a badge for the con. Small world, am I right? CBR article does mention that there was a member of the organizing committee that didn't make it to the con, and they were Ron Franken, who managed to make a cassette tape with comments for the panel. I feel like this just goes on to show how monumental a gathering like this was. I don't think anybody attending there would expect the convention to become the juggernaut that it is today. Now, something I find interesting about this ensemble is how, according to the Geek Frontiers article, Steve Ditko had promised Bernie to attend the convention. Which is crazy because then that would mean this convention appearance was Steve's one and only appearance in conventions in general. And from what I could find from both articles, that seems to be the case. Now, I did find some info in the CBR article that there were some other people who were planning to come but didn't. Rick Berman also shared that he tried to meet with Julie Schwartz and Bob Kane in order to get them to the convention. Julie was a longtime editor at DC Comics, especially for Superman and Batman. Rick claims that this might have been the case because he thinks that Rick and Bob didn't understand what the concept was, that it was just a bunch of kids trading comic books. It's unfortunate that I can't find anything about Bill Finger being invited, considering how Bob stole Bill's credit for Batman. Honestly, this article is so cool to have. This whole article is about the people who organized that event reminiscing about it. Well, at least whoever survived to tell the tale. The article's words, not mine. It's insane to catch a glimpse of the people behind this whole thing. Just a couple of young fans who shared this fiery passion. Not to mention Bernie and Len were only 16. Sure, there was some doubt, like from Len, that they were too young to pull this stuff off. But according to Bernie himself, he didn't even consider failing a possibility. A very young person thing in my humble opinion. The article also mentions that they are very much still into collecting comics. In a CBR article, members that organize everything express what they remember, like them socializing and the whole invitation process that was just talked about. Unfortunately, some people remember more stuff than others, but that's alright. Well, now that we look back at Comic Con's origins, it's no wonder why people wanted to stick around. This, alongside other conventions like sci-fi ones, clearly show that these things were here to stay. Let's look at today. Something happened over the years. Looking back at the origins, it was clear that the whole appeal was interacting with their fans, and the people who worked on the things that brought everyone together in the first place, as well as the whole creative process that comes with it. This can be so cool to a fan into comics and people who want to pursue a career in arts and or writing. You could get a cool glimpse into that world by the people who were there sharing from their own personal experience. While that's still there, I personally can't help shake the feeling that it isn't at the same time. Nowadays, it feels like the main attraction is the content itself, which feels like it's overlooking the people behind it all to some extent, at least for me. But don't take my word for it, just look at the current struggle with AI and the writer's strike. I don't believe the sentiment of the people behind this content are being overlooked is unreasonable. A few examples I can think of are the cases with Peter David and Donny Cates, and I'm sure there are more, where despite Peter creating the Spider-Man 2099 character, he didn't receive any royalties from Spider-Man across the Spider-Verse. To make matters worse, he's going through health issues, and has to deal with a lot of medical bills, to the point that a GoFundMe had to be started in his name. I'll leave a link down below if you want to help out. And the other case with Donny Cates not being compensated with his concept from his Venom 2018 comic run being used in the Spider-Man 2 PS5 video game, even though Spider-Man 2 was the fastest selling PlayStation studio game in PlayStation history. And we can't forget about their partners too, where the person who illustrated Peter's idea was Rick Leonardi, and with Donny Cates' ideas being illustrated by Rick Stegman. I feel like looking at the roots of something like Comic-Con can help remind us what it's all for the people and by the people, which includes the people who work to the bone and use the best years of their life to create for us and to connect with it. I get it. It can be exciting. Exciting seeing the reveal of something alongside other fans. That thing feels otherworldly at times, especially when it's genuinely a knockout. Not to mention, it feels even greater when the reveal resembles something you've always wanted. I believe that everybody should deserve an experience something like that at least once in their life, whether for a video game or for a movie. One personal example I can think of is when the first Spider-Man PS4 game was revealed back in E3 2016. Wario, I felt, was something else, man. And I was experiencing all that at home through the internet. Could you imagine being at E3 in person when that happened? Unfortunately, with the recent news, E3 shutting down for good, these memories can be bittersweet. The reason I'm mentioning this at all is because my sentiment is coming from someone who's an enthusiast, and I feel like it's fair to let the people behind all that be understood and listened to. What was I talking about again? Oh right, cons. With cons overwhelmingly shifting onto what the big media studios are putting out, can't leave an opportunity for something else that can swoop in and put a little more focus on the human connection. That's right, I'm talking about local cons. If you're going to a local con, that means you really enjoy the sport of it. Now, that's not to say that the big cons like San Diego or New York lack human connection or anything. These cons can also be an opportunity for people who live practically nowhere near places like San Diego or New York. For others, especially considering that attending one of those conventions can cost a pretty penny or two. I hope this video serves as a reminder why we even care about these things in the first place. The feeling of community, belonging, and acceptance, and so much more. Whether it's something like being fulfilled creatively. I'll end things off with this quote that summarizes the whole thing the best, and is one of Bernie from the CBR article. Quote, "Back in those days, we didn't make any money on this thing at all. It was a love affair that we all had with comics." End quote. Good to know, Bernie. Good to know.